Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we unpack complex ideas into understandable insights. Today, we're taking a deep dive into some really fascinating new research. It explores how artificial intelligence might be categorizing and conceptualizing objects in a way that's surprisingly similar to how we humans think.
Indeed. Yeah, we'll be looking at how these multimodal large language models, MLLMs, even the traditional LLMs, are forming what you could maybe call mental representations of objects.
Right.
And importantly, what that means for understanding both AI and maybe even ourselves a bit better.
Exactly. So our mission here is to show you how these powerful AIs seem to be developing object concepts that genuinely mirror human thought. Think of this as your shortcut to getting really well informed about the cutting edge of AI and cognitive science. We'll dig into the clever methods they use, the honestly striking correlations they found, and what it all could mean for how we interact with AI in the future. So let's start with us humans. Why is categorizing objects so fundamental to how we think?
Well, it really is the bedrock, isn't it? This ability to categorize, to conceptualize objects, it influences pretty much everything, how we perceive the world, how we make decisions, complex ones even. We're constantly differentiating objects, using these structured comparisons. Yeah. It's essential for just everyday tasks, problem solving.
Okay, so our brains aren't just passively seeing items, they're actively organizing them, building these mental representations like an internal library or something.
Precisely. Yeah, these representations help us recognize things, form categories, organize all our knowledge, and even predict how objects might behave based on, past experience.
And what about those dimensions we use? Like, how do we structure that internal library?
Right. So researchers have identified these key organizing principles. Things like, is it an animal or not an animal? Or is it natural versus human-made, large versus small? These are the sorts of conceptual dimensions we naturally use to bring order to everything.
Okay, that makes sense for us. But let's switch to AI. How on earth do you even begin to map out what's going on inside, like an LLM's mind? It sounds a bit like trying to understand a black box.
That's a great point, because traditionally it is kind of a black box. But this study, they use a really clever approach. It's called sparse positive similarity embedding, or SPOSY modeling. So instead of trying to directly peer into the super complex, often proprietary internal workings.
Which you probably can't do anyway.
Exactly. They inferred the AI's object representations from its behavior, specifically how it handled these odd one-out tasks. It's sort of like letting the AI reveal its own internal structure through its actions.
Ah, I see. So the cleverness is inferring the internal stuff from the observable behavior, a bit like psychologists studying humans, maybe.
You can definitely draw that parallel.
Tell us more about SPOSY then. What makes it different? What's unique about it?
Well, SPOSE works on two key assumptions about these mental embeddings. First is sparsity. That means each object mostly influences just a few key dimensions, not like all 60 of them.
Okay, sparsity. Got it.
And second is positivity. That means a dimension's weight, its importance for an object, directly signals that the related property is present. So unlike some older methods like PCA, SPOSY is really designed to find these distinct, meaningful attributes, ones that can even interact. It gives you much more sort of interpretable insights.
Right. That interpretability seems key. So they have this method. What did the odd one-out tasks actually show? How did the AI compare to humans?
The results were pretty striking, actually. They compared these things called representational similarity matrices, RSMs.
Okay, RSMs, like those mental maps you mentioned.
Exactly. A map showing how similar different objects are judged to be, either by the AI or by humans. And they found really strong correlations. The standard LLM, it showed a correlation of 0.71 with human judgments.
Which is already pretty high.
It is.
Right.
But the MLLM, the multimodal one, was even higher, 0.85. And just for reference, the baseline consistency among humans was 0.9.
Okay, 0.85 for the MLLM. That's incredibly close. What do you think makes the MLLM so much closer to how humans do it?
Yeah, the big factor there is likely the visual information. MLMs process images and text, right?
Right.
That allows them to build richer, arguably more human-like concepts, because we rely so heavily on both visual cues and semantic meaning to categorize things.
That makes intuitive sense. And were these findings, these embeddings, stable? Like if you ran the test again?
Yeah, that's another important part. They found the embeddings from both types of models were remarkably stable and highly predictive. The prediction performance, how well they could predict similarity judgments, it kind of stabilized around 60 dimensions for both humans and the AIs.
Okay.
The study ended up using the top 66 dimensions, just to align the AI models neatly with the 66 core dimensions they identified from the human judgments. And the reproducibility scores, they were exceptionally high. Many dimensions hitting over zero point 0.9 for the LLM, over zero point 0.8 for the MLM, really confirms their stable concepts.
That stability is impressive. Can you maybe walk us through a concrete example just to help visualize how that odd one out task worked?
Sure, certainly. So imagine the model gets a set of three objects. Let's say a tree, a river, and sunglasses.
Okay. Tree, river, sunglasses.
Right. Now, just like humans would, the models consistently picked out sunglasses as the odd one out. Their reasoning, essentially, was that sunglasses are, a man-made accessory for eye protection, not really a natural element or part of an outdoor scene in the same way a tree or river is.
Ah, okay. So it's showing structured, principled judgments, not just random associations.
Exactly. It mirrors that human kind of reasoning.
Now, it's one thing to see these correlations, these numbers, but the actual dimensions AI is using, are they understandable to us? Can we put labels on them?
Absolutely. And that was, I think, one of the most fascinating findings. The dimensions they pulled out from the LLMs and MLLMs, they are indeed interpretable. They had human experts look at them, and they could assign pretty intuitive labels, things like food-related or flying sky-related. It really does sort of pull back the curtain a bit on the AI's internal logic.
Okay, that's cool. And did the AI itself agree? Like, if you ask the MLLM to label its own dimension?
That's another interesting layer. When they asked the MLLMs to label dimensions involved in those concrete comparison tasks, like the odd one out, they were highly consistent with what the humans said.
Okay.
However, they did show some limitations when it came to abstracting away and actually naming the dimension itself,
Yeah.
generalizing the concept.
Ah, so a subtle difference there. They can use the concept consistently, but maybe struggle a bit to define it abstractly.
Something like that. It indicates maybe a subtle difference in exactly how they conceptualize, even if the results are similar.
Interesting nuance. What about the kinds of dimensions? Does AI prioritize different types compared to us?
Yeah, there's a difference there too. Humans, maybe unsurprisingly, tend to be better at using visual information for their dimensions. Color, shape, that sort of thing.
Makes sense we have eyes.
Right. The LLMs, and even the MLLMs, showed a higher proportion of semantic dimensions, based more on meaning, function, relationships described in text. Now for the LLM, that's totally understandable, no visual input. But even the MLLM, which does see images, still showed some limitations compared to how humans integrate everything, especially for dimensions really tied strongly to specific shapes or colors.
So similar overall structure, but maybe different building blocks emphasized.
That's a good way to put it, yes.
Okay, here's a question that really jumped out at me from the outline. How many dimensions does an object actually need for the AI to understand it? You mentioned 66 core dimensions. That sounds like a lot for every single object.
Right. You'd think it might need all of them, or most of them.
Mm-hmm.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The study found that individual objects are characterized by a surprisingly small number of these core dimensions.
Oh, how small?
For the LLMs, just keeping like 3 to 8 dimensions was enough to get 95 to 99% of the full model's performance in explaining those odd one-out judgments.
Only 3 to 8. Wow.
Yeah. For the MLLMs, it was similar, maybe slightly more, 2 to 10 dimensions. And for humans, our own judgments seem to rely on about 7 to 13 core dimensions per object.
So it's like identifying the absolute key features. Can you give an example for a specific object, like how that works?
Sure. Think about, say, an almond. For us, and apparently for these models too, it's primarily defined by just a few key things. It's food-related, right? Maybe it's classification as a nut.
Okay.
You don't need to invoke all 66 possible dimensions like is it electronic or is it furniture to get the essence of almond. Or take a satellite. It's going to be strongly characterized by dimensions like electronics maybe and flying sky-related. It suggests this incredibly efficient structure for representation. A handful of key characteristics are enough. And this isn't just about, saving computational power. It's a really profound hint, I think, that both human minds and these advanced AIs might be converging on some universal kind of minimalist principles for making sense of a complex world.
That is a profound thought. Wow. Okay, so we've talked human behavior, AI behavior, this sparse representation. Does the research actually connect this back to the brain, like biologically? Does it bridge that gap?
It does, and this is another really exciting part of the study. They went that extra step. They explored the relationship between these derived AI embeddings and actual human brain activity using fMRI data from something called a natural scene data set.
Okay, fMRI data, so real brain scan.
Real brain scans, yeah.
Yeah.
And they found that these low-dimensional mental embeddings from the AI models, They actually correlated with activity patterns in various regions of the human brain.
Both regions.
Areas like the early visual cortex, which makes sense, but also higher level areas associated with processing things like faces, bodies, places, and even language areas.
So, wait. It's not just that the AI acts like us in these tasks. It's suggesting that the way it organizes information internally might actually map onto how our own neural pathways, our brains, organize that same information. That feels like a huge leap.
Yes, that's precisely the implication here. It's not just a surface-level mimicry. It suggests a deeper parallel, a potential mapping between the artificial conceptual structure and our biological one. It offers this really fascinating, maybe revolutionary new lens to look at both AI and the brain. And it really aligns with modern ideas in cognitive neuroscience. The hypotheses that our brains also use these kinds of low-dimensional structures to handle the massive amount of information we process. It points towards maybe universal principles.
Yeah, that's a lot to take in. The idea of universal principles for organizing knowledge, biological or artificial. Just pausing on that for a second, does this give us any surprising insights into maybe why human cognition evolved this way, like the efficiency angle?
Oh, absolutely. It strongly reinforces that idea of cognitive efficiency.
Yeah.
Our brains are incredibly powerful, but they're also, resource constrained. If you can get fundamental understanding, effective categorization distilled down into just a handful of core dimensions for any given object, that makes evolutionary sense. It's optimizing for rapid, good enough understanding of the environment without needing to process every single tiny detail all the time. Survival advantage right there.
Right, efficiency as a driving force.
Okay.
Okay, bringing it back to the present. What does all this mean for us, for you listening? Why should you care that AI might be developing human-like object concepts?
Well, there's some pretty broad applications, moving beyond just the pure science of it. First off, think about human-machine interfaces, collaborative systems. If we understand that AI shares some fundamental ways of organizing concepts about objects with us, we can potentially design interactions that are way more intuitive, more natural, almost like we're speaking the same conceptual language.
Okay, smoother human-AI collaboration. That makes sense. And what about if we want AI to think even more like us? Can this research actively help develop those systems?
Absolutely. That's another key implication, these interpretable dimensions. They can directly inform how we build more human-like artificial cognitive systems. For instance, the study actually showed this in practice. They could tailor the prompts they gave the AI.
How so?
Well, they could emphasize dimensions that humans tend to prefer in certain contexts. So if you were comparing images, you might prompt the AI, hey, consider the aspect of red or color more strongly here. Or if you were comparing, say, a lime to some man-made objects, you could prompt it, focus on the human-made versus natural aspect.
And what happened when they did that?
When they gave those kinds of nudges, the AI models made choices that were significantly more consistent with human judgments in those specific tasks.
Whoa, okay. So we can literally guide its attention, its conceptual focus, to align it more with how we might approach the problem.
Exactly. It's like giving it a little cognitive hint, focusing its attention. It really does open up tangible new pathways for building AI. It's more intuitive, more adaptable, maybe even more aligned with our goals and values in complex situations. Think about AI that understands context, nuance, maybe even intent, with a more human-like grasp, because its underlying conceptual space is better aligned with ours.
That's a powerful concept, actively shaping the AI's thought process through targeted prompts based on these dimensions.
It is. And beyond just building better AI, the huge data sets they collected for this research, all those human and AI judgments, they now serve as incredibly valuable benchmarks. We can use them to test and evaluate future AI models to see if they're getting even closer to human-like understanding. So it's this really neat cycle, right? We leverage what we know about human cognition to understand and improve AI. And then, in turn, we can use AI, models like these, as tools to maybe better understand the lingering mysteries of our own minds.
What a deep dive indeed. From something as basic as how we humans categorize stuff around us, all the way to these intricate mental embeddings inside cutting-edge AI. We've seen how these large language models, especially the multimodal ones, aren't just like superficially mimicking. They seem to be genuinely developing ways of conceptualizing objects that really resonate with our own.
It's a truly profound reminder, I think. These AI systems, they seem incredibly complex, almost alien sometimes. But underneath their fundamental structures, the way they organize knowledge, might actually share deep organizational principles with our own brains.
Right.
It's this converging frontier, really, where cognitive science and AI are starting to shed light on the very nature of intelligence itself, whether it's biological or artificial.
Absolutely. And maybe here's a final provocative thought for you to chew on as we wrap up. If AI can learn to think about something as fundamental as objects in such a human-like, interpretable, and frankly efficient way, what other aspects of human intelligence might already be developing sort of naturally just beneath the surface? What truly surprising things could we discover next about AI just by finding clever ways like Spososi to simply observe its behavior? What's emerging that we haven't even thought to look?